again. This is Dr. Charles Babers, and this is another study in the Babers Bible Study series. This one is called The 12 Tribes, and it's actually a companion to an earlier study called Cheaper by the Dozen, Jacob's 12 Sons. So in this one, we'll be looking at the 12 tribes of Israel that descended from those 12 sons of Jacob, and we'll be looking at them on a number of different axes across a number of different books of the Bible. We'll look at some passages from the book of Genesis, from Numbers, from Deuteronomy, First Chronicles, Ezekiel, and even from the book of Revelation. Passages of scripture that we'll look at in this study include Genesis 29 and 30, which tell the story of the birth of Jacob's 12 sons and are the same chapters that we looked at for the study on Cheaper by the Dozen. Then we'll look at Numbers 1 and Numbers 13. We'll look at Deuteronomy 27, First Chronicles 27, Ezekiel 48, and Revelation chapter 7. The underlying and unifying concept in this study is that Jacob and Moses both blessed the 12 tribes or the 12 sons before they died. We'll even do a comparison between the two different sets of prophecies and blessings that the two of them spoke over each of the individuals or the tribes. As their father, Jacob called his 12 sons together, and he blessed each of them and prophesied about them before he died in the land of Egypt, which is where he had brought his family at the request of his son Joseph, based on the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine that he had revealed because of the two dreams of the Egyptian Pharaoh. God had told Moses that because of his disobedience and disrespect in striking the rock instead of speaking to it as he had been instructed, he would not be allowed to enter the promised land, but he would be allowed to view it. And before he ascended Mount Nebo to view the land and then die, Moses blessed each of the tribes individually and then blessed the entire nation of Israel altogether. Jacob and Israel had blessed each tribe when he was on his deathbed. Some of the blessings given by Moses reinforced those previously given by Jacob/Israel, but other of Moses' blessings appear to be different from or even counter to Jacob's. Additional supporting concepts that we'll look at are the mothers of Jacob's sons, the symbols of the 12 tribes, the constellations and zodiac signs associated with each tribe, whether the tribe spoke blessings or curses from Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which are just outside the Promised Land, the 12,000 from each tribe sealed when the sixth seal was opened, and the order of the tribes when they were in camp or when they were marching during the 40 years of wandering in the desert. The first four sons of Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, were all the sons of Leah, Jacob's first wife. By the way, Leah's name means weak eyes, because that's the way she was described in the book of Genesis. The symbol of Reuben, the firstborn son, is water, because Jacob described him as being, quote, unstable as water in his blessing in Genesis 49 and 4. That's also why he's associated with the zodiac sign of Aquarius, the water bearer. Reuben was among those 6 tribes that spoke curses in Deuteronomy 27. He's also one of the 12 tribes mentioned by name in the book of Revelation. His position in camp was to the south, and in marching, his tribe was 6th. Simeon is the second son, and Levi the third, and we'll speak of them somewhat together, and there's a reason for that. It's because Simeon and Levi are discussed together in Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49 and 5. So they are both associated with the zodiac sign of Pisces, the two fish, two suns, two fish. This association is based on their conspiring together to kill all the men of the city of Shechem to get revenge for the prince of that city's abuse of their sister Dinah. That vengeful event can also be seen in the symbol of the two. Simeon's symbol is tower walls because Jacob said that they digged down a wall. And Levi's symbol is a sword because Jacob said that the two of them had, quote, instruments of cruelty in their habitations, referring to the swords that they used to kill the men of Shechem after they had stormed the walls of the city. And a note, a second symbol of Levi is the ephod, which points to the fact that Levi is the tribe of the Jewish priests, and part of the uniform of the high priest is the ephod. Both Simeon and Levi were among the tribes that spoke blessings from the mountains in Deuteronomy chapter 27, and they are both among the tribes that are mentioned in Revelation chapter 7. As far as positioning in camp and while marching, Simeon was also in the south, as was Reuben, but he followed directly after Reuben, who was the leader of the southern tribes. And in marching, he was seventh, again, right after Reuben, who was sixth. In terms of Levi, his position and his marching position were a little different because technically Levi wasn't always considered one of the 12 tribes. They were treated somewhat differently than the rest of them. So the Levites in camp were actually somewhat spread out. Moses and Aaron had their tents on the east side of the tabernacle, but Merari, one of the sons of Levi, was on the north. Gershom, another son, was on the west, and Kohath, the third son of Levi, was in the south. And while marching, Gershom was second in line, Merari was third in line, and Kohath was ninth in line. The fourth of the first set of sons was Judah. And Judah is called a lion's whelp by Jacob. Thus his symbol is a lion, and he's associated with the zodiac sign of Leo, the lion. Judah, too, was one of the tribes that spoke blessings from the mountains outside the promised land in Deuteronomy 27. And he is also one of the tribes that's mentioned in Revelation chapter 7. As far as positioning, in camp, Judah was to the east, and he led the three tribes that were on the east side. And while marching, Judah was always at the front of the line. He was the first tribe to set out whenever the nation moved. The next four sons of the next four tribes, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, represent the four sons that were born to the two handmaids of Leah and Rachel, those being Bilhah, whose name means timid, and who I've shown as a tiny little mouse, and Zilpah, whose name means fragrant, and who I've shown as a bottle of fragrant perfume. Dan and Naphtali are children of Bilhah, while Gad and Asher specifically are children of Zilpah. Jacob said, quote, Dan shall be a serpent by day in his prophecy and his blessing. Therefore, the symbol for Dan is a serpent. Now, there is no serpent-based zodiac sign. The closest would probably be the scorpion or Scorpio, because it's another venomous or crawling creature. So the zodiac sign associated with Dan is Scorpio. As for Naphtali, he's described as a hind or a female deer by Jacob. So his symbol is a deer. Again, there is no deer-based zodiac sign, but there is one and only one zodiac sign that's female in gender, as the hind is a female deer. That sign is Virgo the Virgin, and therefore the zodiac sign associated with Naphtali is Virgo. Of Gad, Joseph said that a troop of soldiers would, quote, overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Thus, his symbol and his zodiac sign are both related to a troop of soldiers. A tent in which soldiers are quartered is his symbol, and Aries, the ram, is his zodiac sign because Aries is the god of war and the god of soldiers. Asher was associated with fatness, with, quote, royal dainties, and with yielding, as in a tree yielding fruit by Jacob. That's in Genesis 49 and 20. Thus, the symbol of Asher is either a goblet, which is related to royalty and feasting on, quote, dainties, or a tree that yields fruit. And the zodiac sign is Libra, the scales, as scales are associated with weighing and measuring fatness. All four of these, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, were among the 6 tribes that were to speak curses from the mountains overlooking the promised land. Of the 4, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher are all also mentioned in the book of Revelation, but Dan is the one tribe that is not. His name does not appear among the 12 tribes who were sealed in the book of Revelation. In terms of positioning, in camp, 3 of them were on the north side of the camp, those being Dan, Naphtali, and Asher. And Dan was in the lead of those 3. Naphtali was after Asher, and Asher was after Dan. So the order would have been Dan first, Asher second, and Naphtali third from the north side of the camp. Gad was on the south side, and he followed after Simeon. In marching, Gad was 13th, Asher was 14th, Naphtali was 15th, and Gad was 8th in line when they struck camp and marched outward. The next 2 sons are Issachar and Zebulun. They were both children of Leah, and they were only born after she had been barren for some number of years, and after the 2 handmaids, Zilpah and Bilhah, had each borne 2 sons for their husband Jacob. It's noteworthy that Leah, besides giving birth to the 2 sons, Issachar and Zebulun, at this time, also gave birth to Jacob's only daughter, Dinah. And after Dinah was born, then Leah didn't give birth to any more children. So altogether, she birthed 6 sons and 1 daughter for her husband Jacob. But getting back to the sons and the tribes, Issachar was described by Jacob as, quote, a strong ass or a strong donkey. Thus his symbol is a donkey. Jacob also said that Issachar, quote, bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant unto tribute. So he was describing Issachar as a beast of burden. Therefore his zodiac sign is Taurus the bull, as bulls or oxen are common beasts of burden, both back then and even today. In terms of blessings and curses, Issachar was one of the 6 tribes that was to speak blessings from the mountains overlooking the promised land. His tribe is among the 12 tribes that were sealed in Revelation chapter 7. In terms of positioning, in camp, Issachar was on the east, and in marching, his tribe took up the 4th position. Zebulun, the next son, was said to, quote, dwell at the haven of the sea, and to be, quote, an haven of ships. Therefore, his symbol is a ship, and his zodiac sign is the water sign of Capricorn the goat. In terms of cursings and blessings, Zebulun was one of the 6 tribes that was to speak curses over the mountains overlooking the promised land. His tribe is mentioned in Revelation chapter 7. And in positioning, he was also on the east side of the camp, on the east side of the tabernacle, while they were in camp. And while marching, he followed right after Issachar, so he was in the 5th position. The last 2 sons of Jacob were Joseph and Benjamin. They were the only 2 sons born to Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. And by the way, Rachel's name means ewe or female sheep. Joseph was said to be, quote, sorely grieved by archers and to have a bow that, quote, abode in strength. Thus his zodiac sign is Sagittarius, the archer. His symbol is a little different. His symbol is a sheaf of grain, which is based on his dream that he had while he was a child, in which he saw his brother's sheaves of grain bowing down to his own sheaf. In terms of blessings and curses, Joseph was one of the 12 tribes that was to speak blessings from the mountaintop. And his tribe is mentioned among the 12 tribes in the book of Revelation. As far as positioning, we'll talk about Joseph when we talk about the place of his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, on the next slide. The last of Jacob's sons by his 2 wives and 2 concubines was Benjamin. He was said to, quote, raven as a wolf by Jacob, so his symbol is a wolf. His zodiac sign is Gemini, the twins, possibly because he was the 2nd son of his mother Rachel. He, like his brother Joseph, was one of the 6 tribes that was to speak blessings, and he is mentioned as one of the 12 seal tribes in the book of Revelation. In terms of positioning, Benjamin was on the west side of the camp, and his marching position was 12th. Ephraim and Manasseh are not strictly speaking separate tribes, but are actually 2 halves of the tribe of Joseph. Therefore, some of the symbolism related to these 2 half tribes are based on what Scripture says about Joseph. The mother of both Ephraim and Manasseh was Asenath, the Egyptian wife of Joseph, their father. Speaking specifically of Ephraim, he's associated with a bull or a unicorn, and therefore with the zodiac sign of Taurus, the bull, because Moses said of Joseph, his father, in Deuteronomy 33 and 17 that, quote, his glory is like the firstling of his bullock. The half tribe of Ephraim is not mentioned in the book of Revelation, but instead the tribe of Joseph is mentioned. In terms of positioning, he did have a position both in camp and while marching. In camp, he was on the west side of the camp, on the west side of the tabernacle, and in marching, Ephraim took up the 10th position. As for Manasseh, he's associated with an olive branch because Jacob said that Joseph was, quote, a fruitful bough or branch. The zodiac sign that's associated with Manasseh is Sagittarius because that's the sign that's associated with his father Joseph. Manasseh is mentioned among the 12 tribes in the book of Revelation, taking the place of the tribe of Dan. In terms of positioning, he also is to the west side of the camp along with his brother Ephraim. And in marching, he followed his brother Ephraim and therefore was in the 11th position. After Israel entered the promised land, the tribe of Levi began to be treated differently from the other 11 tribes. They were not given lands of their own to settle, but were given cities scattered throughout the lands of the other 11 tribes. They didn't have to fight in wars or provide soldiers to the army, but they did have their place in warfare as the Levites usually led the Israelite army into battle carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which was the symbol of their national power. The men of the tribe of Levi were to dedicate themselves to the priesthood, to the spiritual life of the nation, and to the upkeep of the tabernacle or the temple. In many aspects, they were replaced among the 12 tribes by dividing the single tribe of Joseph into the two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. In the next few slides, we'll look at, for each tribe, who were the prominent members, what individual was chosen to lead the forces of that tribe as they went to war, and especially as they went to war to conquer the promised land of Canaan. Which individual was sent by Moses to spy out the land of Canaan before they entered? Who among that tribe at one time or another ruled the nation? And once the nation of Israel was split into the two divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah, which of those two kingdoms did each tribe become a part of? Looking at the first four tribes of Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, as I said earlier, the tribe of Levi never had to provide a commander of the armies because they had no fighting forces, nor did they have to send spies into the land of Canaan. But other than that, they were similar to all of the other tribes in that they had prominent members. For Levi, one of the most prominent was probably Moses. For Reuben, a prominent member would have been Hosea. And for Judah, the most prominent member would have probably been Jesus of Nazareth. Now, we don't have any scriptures in the Bible that talk about a single individual from the tribe of Simeon who was very prominent. So that's kind of unusual among the 12 tribes. In terms of rulers, each of those four had at least one person who ruled the nation at one time or another. And in terms of the northern or the southern kingdom of Israel and Judah, both Reuben and Simeon became part of the northern kingdom of Israel, and Judah was the core of the southern kingdom that took its name, along with the other tribe of Benjamin, but we'll talk about that later. As far as Levi, because they had cities scattered throughout all the 11 tribes, Levi became part of both the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Of the tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, the four tribes that came from the sons of the two handmaids, we can see that among prominent members, the tribe of Dan produced Samson, one of the most famous of the judges. Naphtali produced Barak, who was a judge but shared that judgeship with Deborah. Gad was believed to be the tribe of Jephthah, also one of the judges. And Asher was the tribe of Anna, an important priestess who stayed at the temple and was there when Jesus was brought in on his 8th day of life to be dedicated. We'll not waste a lot of time on other specifics other than to note that as far as rulers of the nation, neither Gad nor Asher ever produced a king of the nation of Israel. In terms of which of the divided kingdoms, the northern or the southern, we see that all four of these kingdoms became part of the northern kingdom of Israel. Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. We see here that each one of them had prominent individuals. Issachar included at least two of the judges, Deborah and Tola, and one king, Baasha. Zebulun also had a judge or two. For sure, Elon was of that tribe, and Ibzan may also have been from the tribe of Zebulun. Obviously, the most important members of the tribe of Joseph were his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, because they became the progenitors of the two half tribes. And finally, of Benjamin, there was another judge, Ehud. Also, the first king of the nation of Israel was King Saul. He was a Benjamite, as was his son Ishbosheth, who for a short period of time became king after Saul's death. Of these four, Issachar, Zebulun, and Joseph all became part of the northern kingdom of Israel after the nation was split. But Benjamin joined with Judah to become part of the southern kingdom of Judah. And in fact, they were the only two tribes in that kingdom, Benjamin and Judah. Of the two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, we see that both were the source of important individuals for the nation. Ephraim produced Joshua, who led the nation after the death of Moses, and Samuel, who was one of the most important of all of the judges and prophets of the kingdom. Manasseh produced Gideon, another really important judge, and Abimelech, also another judge. In fact, Manasseh produced at least four judges, as shown here. In terms of kingdoms, Ephraim and Manasseh both became part of the northern kingdom of Israel. Of note, in terms of the 12 spies, one of the two spies who brought back the good report, Joshua, was from the tribe of Ephraim. The purpose of this list is to show that throughout the Bible there are a number of different lists of the tribes, but they don't necessarily all agree. That does not mean, however, that there's disagreement among the Bible writers as to which tribes made up the nation of Israel. Rather, what it shows is that the exact number of tribes listed and the names that are among the tribes listed is dependent upon the purpose of providing the list in the first place. Some lists have some names and some lists have other names based on the point that the writer was trying to make. For example, in Genesis 49, Moses was relaying the blessings that Jacob gave to each one of his 12 sons before he died. So that list contains 12 names of all the 12 sons who became progenitors of the 12 tribes. However, just 2 chapters later, in the book of Exodus, the first chapter, we see that there are only 11 names listed. Prominently missing is the name Joseph. That doesn't mean that the writer of Exodus didn't believe that Joseph was one of the tribes. Rather, it means that the purpose of that list was to lay out to the reader all of those peoples from the family of Jacob who traveled from Canaan to Egypt to avoid the famine that was about to take place. Joseph is not in that list because Joseph didn't travel from Canaan. He was already in Egypt. And throughout the rest of the Bible, you will see different lists that have different names for other reasons besides that one. For instance, in Numbers 10, you will actually find more than 12 names. You will find Ephraim and Manasseh listed independently because each one of them had its own marching position within the procession of the tribes while they were traveling during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. You'll also see that Levi is listed not as Levi, but as his 3 sons. So that list has approximately 15 members, not 12. And there are other lists that have similar differences. A close examination will show you that in all, there are 9 names that appear on every list, but of the 3 remaining tribes, there are actually 5 different names that come and go into those 3 positions. Those names being Levi, Dan, Joseph, and Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But the bottom line is that we're talking about the same 12 tribes. It just depends on how some of those tribes are divided in half or in thirds to describe what was going on at that time. In these next few slides, we'll look briefly at the blessings spoken by Jacob over his 12 sons and the prophecies for those sons, and we'll compare it to the blessings and prophecies that Moses spoke over the 12 tribes to see if they compare favorably with each other and if they agree. We'll not read them in detail, but I will just simply give you my assessment of the level of agreement between the two. As far as Reuben, Jacob starts off with what seems to be a positive blessing because he talks about Reuben being the beginning of his strength and the excellency of dignity and of power. But he ends by calling Reuben unstable as water and saying that he would not excel because he blamed him for defiling his father's bed. So Jacob spoke a negative prophecy over Reuben. As far as Moses, he said that Reuben should live and not die, and that he should have a large tribe, i.e., his men should not be few. So his blessing was totally positive. Therefore, the two disagree. Jacob spoke evil or negatively about Reuben, while Moses spoke positively. We'll have to consider Simeon and Levi together, mainly for 2 reasons. Because Jacob spoke a single joint blessing and prophecy over the 2 of them, and Moses, while he didn't speak a joint prophecy over the 2 of them, he actually said nothing about Simeon whatsoever, only speaking of Levi. And if we were to read those, which I will not, we will see that Jacob's prophecy over Simeon and Levi was totally negative. He spoke of them being instruments of evil and having done damage, talked about of their anger and how they slew a man. He talked about them being fierce, talked of their wrath, and talked about them being cruel. Overall, very negative. As for Moses, he spoke very positively of Levi, speaking of him as teaching God's judgments to the people of Israel, of being in charge of the burnt offerings and the sacrifices, etc., etc. So comparing Levi as he is depicted by Moses and Levi in Jacob's blessing, we see that they disagree. Jacob's prophecy is negative, while Levi's is totally positive. Next, we go to Judah. What we'll see is that Judah is described positively by Jacob, and essentially you can read his blessing as a prophecy of the fact that Jesus, the Messiah, would come from the tribe of Judah. While Moses' blessing can't be seen to address or even hint at specifically Jesus, it's still positive. So in those two, we see that their prophecies of Judah agree that they are both very positive. Concerning Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, we can say that in each case, the blessings of Moses and of Jacob agree. If we start with Dan, in both cases, what we'll see is that the blessing and the prophecy is neither totally positive nor totally negative. There's a little bit of each in both of their blessings, so they agree in that. Some good, some bad. As far as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, however, both Jacob and Moses speak only positively about each of them. So in that they all agree. As we did with Simeon and Levi, we have to speak of the tribes of Issachar and Zebulun together, this time because Moses spoke a single joint prophecy over those two tribes. Comparing Jacob's blessings over Issachar and Zebulun and Moses' blessings over those two tribes, we see nothing but positives. We see words like pleasant, we see words like tribute, haven, words like righteousness, abundance, and treasure. So both of them speak of great things in the future for both Issachar and Zebulun. When it comes to Joseph, both Jacob and Moses say more about this one individual in this one tribe than they do about any of the other 11. But the bottom line is that they both speak very positively of the future of the tribe of Joseph and of the individual Joseph himself. So in that they agree. What we see of Benjamin is that Jacob speaks rather negatively of his youngest son, saying that he's ravening as a wolf and devouring prey and dividing spoils, while Moses speaks very positively of him, saying that he's the beloved of the Lord, that he dwells in safety, that he's covered by God all day long, and that he dwells between God's shoulders. So the bottom line on that one is that the two do not agree. Finally, we come to Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph and the grandsons of Jacob. And while Jacob didn't actually speak blessings and prophecies over his two grandsons when he was speaking to his sons, he did speak to them a chapter earlier in Genesis chapter 48 when he called Joseph to bring his two sons to him, and he adopted them as his own. He spoke over them the same blessing, which was a very positive one, in which he said, quote, "And thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh." Genesis 48 and 20b. Moses says nothing to either of them, choosing instead to speak only to their father Joseph. So there is neither agreement nor disagreement between Jacob and Moses with respect to those two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So then, what is one to make of the fact that there are actually a few, not very many, but a few instances where the prophecies for one of these sons or tribes given by Jacob is different than that given by Moses a few hundred years later? I would say that the answer is in the fact that what both of them were speaking were prophetic, and therefore the prophecies that they were given could be for different times in the life of those individuals in those tribes. Nothing that either one of them spoke was untrue, and they all came to pass. So one would have to assume that when one said positive things about an individual's future and another said negative about the same individual, that they were talking about different time periods within the span of time as related to that individual or that tribe. So today, this tribe may be going through a negative spell, whereas 100 years later, they would go through a positive spell. So I see no real reason to believe that the conflicting prophecies provided by Jacob and by Moses are anything more than a difference in the span of the prophecy itself. We can see something similar even in the prophecies of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament, whereas some of them are positive, speaking of his triumphs. Some of them are also negative, speaking of his death and his burial. So The fact that some of them are positive and some of them are negative doesn't mean that they're speaking of two different individuals. It means that they're speaking of two different aspects of the same person. The same, I would say, is true of Jacob's blessings and prophecies versus Moses' blessings and prophecies.